Record.
Okay, how about now?
I see you recording. Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, this call will be being recorded so that it can be added to the site afterwards. The site and the deck will be available up on the Anvil site here after the webinar. We'll just give it one more minute to let people join. And we are slightly limited by time. These Zoom calls tend to cut off after 40 minutes. Sometimes they'll grant you extra time miraculously, but we're going to try and keep it to about 35 minutes here for our deck. Allow some time for questions. If anybody else hops on, they have questions there at the end. Maybe they potentially missed the first part of our webinar here. But yeah, around 35 minutes is what we're trying to keep it to today. All right, so it is new. Let's just go ahead and jump right in. This is the March webinar for Anvil Media, and the topic we are covering is voice and schema markup. My name is Mike, and I'm an SEO specialist here at Anvil, and I'll let my co-host introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel. I'm also the SEO specialist at Anvil. And yeah, we're both looking forward to sharing this information and webinar with you all.
I want to jump right into the agenda. We're going to be talking about what is voice search and what is position zero. What do these terms mean? We'll talk about why voice search matters. And then next we'll talk about v-commerce or voice commerce, how voice search is affecting the e-commerce world. And lastly, there under the voice search area, we'll talk about optimizing your site for voice search. Next, we'll talk about schema markup and how to optimize for schema markup. And we'll additionally talk about some best practices because there are some small technicalities there with schema markup which I want to make you aware of. Lastly, we'll talk about a specific type of schema markup, which is really useful in relation to voice search here, and that's FAQ schema markup. Lastly, we'll talk about how voice search and schema work together. And then we'll end with talking about the future of voice search and schema markup and where we see it going, in the next few years. So what is voice search? Voice search is a search performed through a voice-activated virtual assistant to obtain information or complete an action. And some of the most popular voice assistants include Siri from Apple, Google Assistant, Alexa from Amazon, and Cortana from Microsoft. You can see that Apple and Google share about a 36% market share of the voice search world, and Amazon, Microsoft, and other voice search assistants share that remaining percent there at a lower clip than Apple. So some of the top voice assistants, as I mentioned, Siri, Cortana, Google Assistant, Bixby is another one, Amazon Alexa. These voice assistants are really, growing in popularity on all of our devices that we have, whether it be our cell phones or our countertop speakers that we, keep in the kitchen or around our living room. Companies like Amazon have their own whole suite of different types of speakers, and Google has the Google home screen you can keep in the kitchen there, or again around the living room to use for entertainment. Or companies like Sonos are moving into the smart speaker space, and I can definitely see companies, general speaker companies like JBL, even moving into the smart speaker space down the road here.
Perfect. So next we'll briefly talk about position zero. And it's really important to understand what position zero is because voice assistants and virtual assistants, like Mike just talked about, are more likely to feature your position the higher you are up in the search engine results. So position zero is essentially the term for the special results in a Google search that typically appears at the very top of the search engine results page. and they usually are above any traditional ads that you might see and above all of the other typical search engine results. And the position 0 results have enhanced functionality. So to the right, you can see some of the screenshots. So in the blue box, you can see that there are individual steps highlighted within the result itself. And there are some FAQs that you can see as well in that middle screenshot. So position 0 is a great way to show your results in an enhanced form and to really attract as much attention as possible to your result. And then the main method in which you are featured in these top positions, specifically position 0, is through the use of structured data, which we'll get into in a little bit further in the webinar. And then lastly, about 40.7% of all answers from voice search are pulled from position 0. So as I just mentioned, it's really important that the more visible your results and your website are, the more likely you will be featured as a resource or an answer when somebody is conversing or asking their virtual assistant a particular question or a task or anything like that. And so here are just a few bullet points about why voice search matters, why it's important. And so the first bullet point is talking about mobile search. So of all the mobile queries that are performed, about 20% of those are actually voice searches. So what we're seeing is more and more people using their virtual assistants like Siri or Google Assistant to perform searches on their smartphones. About 27% of the online global population are using voice search on mobile. So we're not just seeing voice search being performed through the smart speakers. As I just mentioned, we're seeing it really grow within users who are on their mobile phones and using their smartphones to complete some of these searches. Around 24% of Americans own a voice-activated smart speaker in their home. So that's a good percentage of people who rely upon a virtual assistant or regularly use a virtual assistant. About 65% of consumers ages 25 to 49 talk to their voice-enabled devices daily. So that's a really important statistic to consider, especially if that falls within your target audience. It could be an audience that would really benefit from a strong voice search strategy in your overall SEO strategy. And then according to Google, among smart speaker owners who regularly use them, 62% will actually make a purchase using that technology in the next month. So we're not only seeing voice search being used for research or for getting directions and things like that, we are seeing more and more people use them to actually make purchases. And then voice search in terms of v-commerce or voice commerce, virtual commerce, basically what we're talking about is people using their smart speakers to make purchases. So around $7 billion is attributed to the Amazon Echo in 2020. So again, that's a pretty large amount of people who actually own an Amazon Echo. Of American adults who have access to a smart speaker, about 11.5% claimed to use them to buy something at least monthly. So we're not just seeing one-time purchases, we're seeing regular purchases and multiple purchases from one single customer. Around 51% of consumers claim they would use voice search to find a local business near them. So voice search and local businesses go hand in hand, but again, kind of going back to the mobile aspect of voice search as well, all of those work together to really enhance the importance of local SEO and voice search and all of these different components working together. And then lastly, nearly a quarter of smartphone voice search users order phone via their voice command in a typical week. So just additional information as to how voice search is used across the internet community as a whole.
Yeah, this next slide is just another interesting graphic showing the circumstances that users are really likely to use voice search to find a local business. And this graph is actually from 2018. So I assume it's really changed, especially with the year of 2020 confining us all to our homes. The voice search and especially the local search as the movement to shop local, certain of these categories have probably increased to a much higher percentage. And some of those top circumstances where somebody would use voice search to find a local business include making a reservation at a restaurant near them, finding the prices, availability, or even purchasing a product from a local business. Those are here around 46%, 41%, and 32% respectively. And then other ways people use their virtual assistants would be to book things like a beauty appointment, a medical appointment, or even to get a tradesman to come to their house for services. And how to optimize for voice search. We've already kind of covered a little bit. Optimizing for voice search really begins with a website that demonstrates keyword relevancy, fast site speed, and strong user experience. A really well-optimized site overall is the first step in building a site that's optimized for voice search. Ensuring your company has an up-to-date and fully optimized Google My Business listing. Google My Business is the first place that Google looks for business looks for information on a local business. And voice search using a smartphone means that those search engines can track where you are. Using your location services on your phone, they know where you are. So those businesses that are visible within the local map pack are more likely to be offered as choices for search. Understanding who your target audience is and how they search or how they speak. It might be local abbreviation, a local nickname. Here in Portland, Oregon, it annoys me, but people will say PDX. They'll search using, donuts in PDX or local craftsman in PDX. So that's, an example for us here in Portland. But, geographically, wherever you are, might use your own different abbreviations or neighborhood terms. Incorporating conversational keywords with your content. And that just is because, users speak to their virtual assistants a bit more conversationally. So making your content on your site and your keywords that you use a bit more conversational can definitely help optimize for voice search. And something we'll talk about here in an upcoming slide is the use of FAQ content. And FAQ content is important because that's how generally users are performing these voice searches. They're asking their virtual assistant a question, a who, what, when, where, why. So really building out a page with that information about your business, your product, or your service is going to help you directly answer those questions on site and potentially show up in the voice search because you are answering those questions, again, right there on your site. And the last bullet here in bold, implementing that schema markup to qualify your website to appear in the rich results and featured snippets. As Rachel said earlier, I think it was 40.7% of the voice searches are pulled from these rich snippets. So they're definitely very important for research. So what is schema markup? What is the schema markup we've been talking about? Schema markup, also commonly referred to as structured data markup, is a block of code that allows search engines to better understand the content or the topic of a web page or website. And the search engine then has the ability to display additional, more specialized results related to that content. And these are these rich snippets that we've been talking about. These rich snippets in that position 0 significantly enhance the appearance of a web page in a search engine result page. As you saw earlier, it takes up a lot of real estate there in a search, so it draws the eyes of the users. Schema markup is defined on schemaorg.com. That website contains over 800 different definitions, each with up to 20 or more descriptive properties. And these definitions are those topics or ideas which the web page or the website is trying to convey. Some of those most commonly used structure markups that we see here at Anvil are the local business markup, website markup, organization markup, product markup, and the FAQ markup.
Perfect. So now we'll go into some information about how to implement schema, what some best tips and tricks are to follow, and then we'll also talk about FAQ schema specifically. So when it comes to optimizing schema, it might seem a little daunting, especially if you've never been involved with code before, or if you've never worked as a developer before. The thought of placing additional code onto your website might seem really scary, but luckily there are a number of different tools, there's plugins and guides that you can use to properly add structured data to your website. And so one of the reasons WordPress is such a widely used and widely loved CMS platform is the use of plugins that make it easy for those who are not experienced with technical components of a website to implement some of these more advanced features like schema markup. So specifically with WordPress, Yoast is a very helpful tool and helpful plugin when it comes to adding schema markup to your site. All you have to do once that plugin is activated is select the type of schema you wish to add to that page, and it'll automatically populate the pieces of information, the lines of code that you would need to then qualify your site for those rich results and those featured snippets. Squarespace will auto-generate your schema based on the contents of the page, and the additional structured data can be added to the header through the page settings as well. So a lot of these CMS websites make it really easy and really straightforward for you to add schema markup to your website. There are a few generator tools that make it easy to actually generate this schema markup itself. So in the appendix of this webinar deck, we've listed some of our favorite tools. And once you have the generated code provided by these tools, all you'll have to do is copy and paste the code into the header of whichever page you're trying to optimize. And basically with these generator tools, all you do is put in the URL of the page you're trying to mark up. You'll click the different elements of your page, like your logo, your business name, things like that, and it'll automatically spit out the code that you'll need in a fully accurate and fully adheres to best practices. So it makes it really easy to actually generate code that you'll need. And then specifically for FAQ pages and FAQ schema markup, these are really important when it comes to optimizing for search. We've kind of really emphasized FAQ schema markup throughout this whole webinar. But when it comes to understanding which questions you need to use, or what content you should actually put within your FAQ pages, within your FAQ sections of your website, you can actually find common questions that users are asking about your business, your product, your industry through actual keyword research, which we'll get into in just a moment. And so this slide goes into some schema markup best practices. And this slide is really important because if schema markup isn't implemented correctly, there could be the chance that Google doesn't qualify your site, that Google rejects the code that you put on your site, which means that you won't be featured in those in position 0 or any of those other rich snippets. So it's really important to understand what the best practices are when it comes to adding structured data to your site. So the first is understanding that structured data will enable your website or the feature of your web page to be present, but structured data and schema do not guarantee that it will be present. So Google will customize and tailor search results depending on what they think will be best for that particular searcher. So Google will take into account your previous search history, what your location is, what device you're on. So all of that will dictate what the actual results page will look like. And that will then kind of determine what rich snippets or what rich results will then appear on the page itself. So just because you do use Schema doesn't mean you're guaranteed to be featured on Google itself. The second is that the structured data on any page should describe the content of that page. So you don't want to try and trick Google. You don't want to try and perform any practices that aren't, accepted by Google. So do not try and create blank pages or empty pages that are destined to just hold structured data. The structured data should be about physical and visible elements within the page itself. Do not add structured data about information that is not visible to the user, even if the information is accurate. So if the information on the page does not reflect what is in the structured data markup itself, Google will flag that as, errors and things like that. So you won't be able to actually take advantage of what the structured data can offer. Make sure to include all of the required properties for an object to be eligible for appearance in Google search. So with each types of schema markup, particularly with FAQ, Google requires that you include certain pieces of information within the code. And if you don't include those, then you won't qualify to be featured in rich results. Google will flag your code with errors. And so, yeah, you won't be able to, again, take advantage of what schema markup offers in terms of your appearance on Google itself. So if you do have questions about what the required properties are, you can always refer to the Google developer articles. You can look up, which required properties do I need for XYZ types of schema to make sure that you're following all of the best practices. There are recommended properties that Google suggests you add, which will just make it more likely that your information can appear in search results. But the goal is always to be more accurate than to try and supply as much information as possible. So if you have the ability to add additional recommended properties, by all means do so, but always make sure that your code is accurate, because we all know Google will definitely flag anything that's inaccurate or code that doesn't adhere to best practices. Make sure you don't block your structured data pages to Googlebot using robots.txt, no index, or any other access control method. We want Google to be able to crawl this code that we put on our website. So make sure that Google can access any of those pages that have schema markup on them. Make sure that your schema markup provides up-to-date information. So if there is time-sensitive content like news articles and blog posts, Google will favor those who are up to date and current and won't show any content that is no longer relevant. And then lastly, the most important one is do not mark up any misleading content. So don't try and fake reviews, and don't focus on any content that's unrelated to the overall topic of the page itself. And if you want any additional best practices, any more specific guidelines, we have the link at the bottom of this slide here that links to Google's general structured data guidelines to follow. And so specifically focusing on FAQ schema markup, this is the type of schema that we've really been emphasizing throughout this whole webinar. And what FAQ schema markup involves is the implementation of schema to a list of questions and answers. And this is commonly found on an FAQ page of your website. Properly marked up FAQ pages qualifies a website to be shown in rich results. So not only does this enhance the way your result shows up on Google, it makes you stand out more amongst your competition. Because you're earning more visibility and more attention onto your listing, you have a greater chance of earning more traffic to your website. And relating this specifically to voice search, you have a much greater opportunity to be featured by virtual assistants such as Google Assistant. To understand which questions should be featured on any given page, there are two methods that you should use. So the first is to converse and reference any internal team members that would that are directly involved with whatever the contents of that page provide. So if there are customer service team members that might have insight as to what questions are commonly asked from actual customers, that would really help to gain insight as to what active customers are currently asking, what questions they actively need answered. And then on the flip side, to understand what potential new customers might ask, that's where you'll want to do some of your standard research. So performing searches on the topic on Google itself. You can reference the people also ask section, which you'll see on the left here. You can see which of those questions people are actively asking, and these are the most commonly searched questions on Google at the very moment. So again, these are real-time results that you can just pull and implement onto your own website. And then there's also the related searches at the bottom of Google that shows additional searches that people will commonly type in or people will commonly ask along with whatever you searched. And when you do successfully implement FAQ schema markup, what you'll see is on the right-hand side here, you'll see with your standard title and meta description, right underneath is the actual questions and answers that you have programmed and included within the code on your page. So again, you're making your results stand out. You're giving users more context, more information that relates directly to them. And all of these things work together to help you become more of a reliable and trustworthy resource from a virtual assistant's perspective, like Google Assistant, like Siri, and all of those that we previously discussed.
So yeah, if it's not clear, we here at Anvil and the SEO industry as a whole really believe that schema and structured data and voice search really work together. You can't really have a fully optimized voice search without that schema markup. And the purpose of schema markup is to allow Google and other search engines to understand the content on your page as clear as possible. Understand what you're trying to cover in a given web page. So the goal of any voice search, the goal of any search, particularly voice search, is to answer the question a user has as clearly as possible. So using that schema is essentially having that answer for the voice assistant there underlined, bold, and highlighted for them to see. As we mentioned earlier, 40.7% of all answers from voice search are bold. It's clear there's a relationship there between having a site that's well optimized with schema markup and being optimized for voice search. Schema markup, again, does not ensure your website will show up in a voice search result. However, using structured data is becoming a standard element in most website optimizations. Here at Anvil, it's something we baseline recommend for every client to add some sort of schema markup to their site to really boost their clicks and impressions through to their site. And so, a business that does not adapt now with that structured data, with that schema markup, is really in danger of getting left behind. And when it comes to marketing, when it comes to ranking and search engine results, getting left behind is never going to be a good thing. So where do we see voice search and schema going in the future? Voice search and voice commands on our smartphones are going to continue to get smarter. They're going to continue to get better, added functionality. Your apps, anywhere from your Instagram down to your bank app, might have additional voice features. I know I've seen some already implemented. We really think that voice ability for everything on your smartphone is going to continue to increase and expand. Virtual assistants will become more accurate. Similar to the smartphones, will become smarter, able to do more tasks, answer more questions. So we definitely see those virtual assistants, those countertop assistants, expanding in their functionality as well. One thing that I definitely see is voice search paid advertisement becoming a factor here down the road. We know Google and other search engines don't want to miss out on that potential ad revenue. You see in a traditional search now, you see it's three ads typically above the organic search results. So I think what we'll start to see is paid answers to questions in a voice search. It might be you're asking how to replace a fuse in my house. You might get a sponsored answer from a company like Home Depot before, and it's going to say, this answer is sponsored by Home Depot. Give you the answer, and then you'll hear an additional answer from an organic source as well. Definitely see that paid advertisement becoming a factor here in voice search down the road. Additionally, more types of structured data will become available as search engines continue to develop their algorithms to better support search intent. Just in the last few years, we've seen a whole host of structured data has come out, and so defining new elements is definitely, schema is always expanding. So there'll definitely be new schema elements here in the future. And that, our final bullet here is that correlation between a page that is well optimized to schema markup and a web page that is featured in voice search will only continue to become stronger. So just to wrap up our presentation here, we really believe that local business and e-commerce sites are among those top sites which should be using a schema strategy to optimize for voice search. Obviously, as I said, we recommend it for every business to add schema to their site and be optimizing for voice search. But we really see the most benefit for local business sites and e-commerce sites. Owning position 0 is incredibly important to appearing in voice search, and as a result of that on-site optimization, the whole site, but definitely including that schema markup. Adding schema markup and optimizing for voice search are becoming the standard rather than the exception. Anvil recommends that every business use schema markup to remain competitive and be optimizing for voice search. So a little shameless self-promotion here at the end. You can contact the team here at Anvil Media for help or guidance on any of this schema markup or voice search optimization, as well as keyword optimization, page speed optimization. And we're here to help you optimize your website. So we've left a little time for questions, but this is the end of the actual slide deck here. I believe so we're open for questions now. And if there are no questions, you can always feel free to reach out via email or via Anvil's contact us page on our website. If you have a question that you think of later, we're always available there as well. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this deck will be available on the website afterwards.
So it looks like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Now you can take your turn.
No, I was going to say within the chat, we have a question that says, what are your recommended tools for implementing schema markup? So when it comes to implementing your schema markup, if you have a WordPress site there, like we said, Yoast is a really good one. It makes it really easy. There's a drop-down menu that you basically just say, I want to add FAQ schema to this page, or like blog post schema to this page, and it makes it really easy. And then within WordPress itself, there are millions of different plugins that you could choose, like WP Rocket. There's another, like SEO Everywhere, I think it's called. So you can just go to the there's a plugin library essentially on WordPress, and you can search for implementing schema markup, things like that. And then Squarespace, yeah, we mentioned Squarespace will automatically populate the schema markup itself. With Shopify, again, Shopify will dynamically populate the schema. So it kind of depends on what CMS or website builder you use, but whichever, if you do use one of those methods, that will be the easiest route to take. And then if you don't use any of those and you are just, you built your website yourself, or it's outside of one of those tools, I would recommend using those some of the generator tools that are within the appendix of this deck, like the Google's structured data markup helper. Like I said, you just put in your URL of the page. It will show the actual web page, and you just click on the different elements that will make up the schema markup. So for FAQs, you will literally just type in what the question is, what the answer is, and the tool will automatically create the code that you can then place on your website. So yeah, there's a ton of different ways to really easily and painlessly add schema to your site.
Yeah, Rachel covered it all there. Well said. Yes, you're welcome for the presentation. You know, it's our pleasure here to do these monthly webinars. We suggest to constantly try to improve the content used or to allow better ranking. You know, with refreshed content, new content, we typically see that coming out of the blog. And blog, you know, you can create any kind of content in your blog, but what we typically see is article markup used there. If it's a traditional news article, I've seen websites use FAQ markup in their blog for, you know, maybe if they answer 4 or 5 questions each month or each week in a blog, and that would be, you know, another use of structured data there. Rachel, did you have any input on that?
Yeah, I would definitely say too, if you are working to improve your content, that means that you're keeping up to date and you're making sure the content is relevant. And so that kind of correlates to one of our previous notes that Google prefers information that's up to date and that is current and all of that stuff. So it would definitely help to make sure that, yeah, your content is as best that it can be.
And I'm not sure we mentioned it in the different types, but it's definitely a structured markup type is events. There's an event markup, which, you know, very simply allows you to mark up, you know, the name of the event, the place. It's actually even changed in the last, you know, few months to a year, adding the option to say if it's an online event. You can have ticket information if it's a paid event. So that's definitely a refreshed content, a fresh content piece there. If you have an events page, if your business hosts events, to update that events markup schema on a regular basis. All right, were there any more questions? How important